Hello there, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name's Ian, and joining me today from immersiveaudioalbum.com is Jonathan Cornell. Hello.
Hello.
Good to see you. How you doing today?
Doing good. Glad to be back.
Good to have you. So, today we're going to talk about immersive albums, multi-channel albums in, live albums that have been released in multi-channel. I believe we're going to cover 5.1. We're going to cover quad, and we're going to cover Dolby Atmos. And kind of the impetus behind this discussion was the release of Deep Purple's Made in Japan. And I started thinking about how until relatively recently, there's been like little things here and there, but we haven't gotten like a lot of these really classic live albums and multi-channel until like the last couple of years. And like within the last 2 years or so, we've gotten like Bursting Out by Jethro Tull. We've gotten Playing the Fool by Gentle Giant. I'm starting to give up our list a little bit here. But this album, Made in Japan, is significant because it's not the first live album. There were, of course, many before that. But this is perhaps the most iconic and influential live album because it was one of the first double live albums. And this became like an institution in the 70s. All major artists were releasing these double live albums. And back then they sold really well. I just be honest, like I hadn't heard this album, Deep Purple's Made in Japan, prior to the Atmos mix, but I had several folks write me who knew my tastes and they were like, Ian, you need this. And I was like, yeah, but it's like $60. And it's like, no, but you won't regret it. And the truth is I don't regret it because this is a fantastic mix. I just want to talk a little bit about it. Now, are you familiar with the original mix of this, Jonathan?
Yeah, I do have the original double LP, but like the record that was in my dad's collection that he loved was Machine Head. So
Right.
that was kind of like the Deep Purple that I knew growing up. And I heard this like you more recently.
Cool. Because like I had Machine Head on vinyl as a teenager, and I really liked it, but I had never really explored Deep Purple further. And I was listening to this mix, and when Child in Time came on, it's like a perfect title because it took me back to being very young and hearing that song on FM radio at night. And it was just like a transportive experience back to my youth. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that was Deep Purple. This is sweet. So let's talk about this mix a little bit. What impresses me is that much like the Pink Floyd at Pompeii mix, this is very sparse. This is 8 tracks. You could argue that there's not enough here to go immersive with. But personally, I really like these kind of more subtle, sparser Atmos mixes because I feel like there's more space for things to live in. And if you read Steven's liner notes, I think he describes it perfectly. Like you are in the front row of a Deep Purple concert, and the band is in front of you. Maybe you might get some guitar or special effects keyboard stuff in the heights, but you can hear like the audience is behind you. Like you're in the hall, you can hear reflections and stuff off the back wall, but he is flying some guitar solos and stuff in there too to just add to the immersion factor. So what did you think of this mix, Jonathan?
Well, in the liner notes, like he says exactly how the multi-track broke down, which is interesting. So it was recorded on 8-track, but all the instruments are in mono except for the drums.
Drums are in stereo. Yeah.
Drums are on a stereo pair, and there's a stereo like audience, venue mic, which kind of fades up, between the tracks when there's audience noise, and then it sort of goes down during those songs. So there's really only 6 elements to mix into, 11 speakers on a 714 setup. So how do you mix that in surround? And I think the compromise he came up with is good because if you think about like, it would be strange to have the drums and, lead vocal in front and then like the guitar and keyboard all the way in the back.
Right.
So what he ended up doing is, if you have a 714 system, the Richie Blackmore's guitar is mostly in the left side speaker, but not totally in it. It's still like attached to the front. And John Lord's keyboards are in the right rear speaker, also sort of attached to the front. So it feels like you're sort of on stage with the band wrapping around you, but it doesn't pull too much energy out of the front. No. So I think it works really well. And like you mentioned, in a couple of the songs, like in Lazy and Space Truck, and there are parts where like the keyboard or guitar flies around, and that's fun. I enjoy that stuff.
Yeah. And I'm on a 5.2.1 system, right? Yeah, because that's I always get
5.1.2.
Right. Yes, because it's a 5.1 system with the height speakers. But I'm fascinated by how he mentioned that he did add artificial reverb, because there is on the original mix. But that's mostly what's going into like the ceiling speakers. How is that effect on a full system?
Well, it's the reverb is probably stereo, but it's suspended between, if you have 4 height speakers, it just comes out of both of them.
Oh, that's cool.
So like the left channel is in the front left and rear left, and it sounds very immersive.
Yes. I would agree. And I would say that the easiest comparison is Pink Floyd at Pompeii. It's a very similar effect to me, and even like Bursting Out kind of has that sort of wraparound effect. Even in my system, I can feel that thing just kind of like floating in from the sides to the back. I did have a chance to listen to the original mix, because there is an excellent transfer of the original mix on this, and this was always a great sounding album to begin with. So, it's no surprise that it's a great sounding Atmos mix. But what's always the concern is that you're going to lose that glue. Like that really important glue, especially for a rock album. And I feel like this never does. I mean, it cranks up so great. Ian Gillian's voice sounds fantastic. The dynamics are really, maybe improved. Like, I feel like there's some things in this mix that are just barely audible. Like, you have to turn it up really loud to get the full effect. But then like for instance, like Child in Time, when he comes in with those dynamic screams, it's just like, wow, peel and paint stuff. But yeah, I wanted the opportunity to talk about this, because, I don't feel like I'm qualified to do a full review, because I haven't heard all the different variants of it that have come out over the years. But, this was, where the idea started to do a multi-channel, live albums discussion. And, I just wanted to tell anybody who's watching, listening, interested, go check this out. Now, you did mention that some folks have had some criticisms against this mix. Did you want to summarize that? Like, what some of the criticisms are?
I don't know. I mean, I've read a couple of comments that people think like the guitar is a little bit low in spots, things like that. I mean, I haven't experienced any of that on my system. I mean, I think it sounds great. Like you said, great dynamics. The spatial spread is about as well as you could do, considering the limitations of the multi-track elements.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're quad heads, so like, limitations can be fun and can add to creativity.
Well, I think kind of the primary, point of discussion we're gonna, get into in this video is whether, when you're mixing a live album in surround or Atmos or whatever, do you want it to sound like you're in the audience watching a concert, or do you want it to sound like you're sort of on stage with the band with actual instruments behind you? And, just like how people have different opinions about how far you could go mixing studio albums in surround, like what kind of elements are appropriate to put in the back or height speakers. There's, a lot of opinions about whether people think that, mixing a live concert should be more of like a natural sounding thing. I mean, my opinion, and I think you agree with me, is that if you're going to be, sitting in your living room in the sweet spot, like, you might as well make it a fun experience and do something different that you couldn't do when you're actually going to see a concert. Yeah. Because when you go to see a show, all this, unless you go to see an artist who has a, like multi-channel PA. And I know Steven Wilson has done some tours in the past with quad sound.
And Pink Floyd did too in the
back
70s.
in the 70s. Yeah. But for the most, in most cases, it's just front of house and you're sort of feeling the audience around you. So it would be easy to mix it like that. And a lot of live DVDs do have surround mixes that are approached that way. But I always think it's cool to sort of go beyond that and make it kind of a unrealistic but fun experience.
Right. The way I would put it is I like to be placed inside of the live album as a live album. So like put me in the audience, but put me in the band too. Like it doesn't necessarily need to be a naturalistic representation.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, make it's like taking a studio album, making it 3-dimensional. Well, just take the live album, make it 3-dimensional. And I think that, you know, for a while, Wilson was very hesitant about doing live recordings, and I understand why. And I think it was probably that very thing. But I think he's done a great job of placing you within the headspace of these live albums. So, what's your next pick?
All right, so well, obviously, it's nice to introduce it. We're going to do our picks. We each picked our 10 favorite live
10-ish.
10-ish. Yeah, for me, it's 10. I don't know for you, but the first one I'm going to talk about is the Eagles farewell tour live from Melbourne, which was released in, I think, 2005 or 2006. There's a couple different versions of this. There's a 2-disc DVD set. There's a Blu-ray, which is what I've got. There's also there's an HD DVD. Remember those? Blu-ray won that format war.
Yeah.
But it's kind of funny that this is called the farewell tour, because as we know, the Eagles continued touring for many years after 2005. They're still touring now. They're playing at the Sphere. But this is a pretty cool release, and one of the reasons why I picked this one is because it was mixed by Elliot Shiner, who's one of my favorite surround mixers. And he worked on a bunch of different projects for the Eagles, including another live record called Hell Freezes Over that was released in the mid-90s. That was like when the band first got back together after like a very long breakup. But one of the things that's cool about, Elliot Shiner's approach to mixing live albums is, we were just talking about this idea of, do you make it like a fun experience, or do you make it, like you're at the concert? His approach is kind of like, well, if you watch the video, you'll see that there's a lot of musicians on stage at this concert. There's the Eagles themselves, which is like, 4 or 5 guys. And then there's this whole back row of other musicians. There's like a 4-piece horn section. There's a piano and keyboard player. There's several percussionists. And the approach in the 5-1 mix is like, let's put the Eagles in the front and like everybody else in the back. And there's absolute separation between the front and back speakers. So it's not like in the Steven Wilson mix of Made in Japan, where there's things like mixed a little further back. Like there's things all the way in the back in this concert. Like if you listen to some of the songs, like the horns are completely in the back. There's keyboards and piano coming completely from behind you. I mean, it's mixed basically like a studio record. And I would say it's perhaps more extreme in its separation than some studio mixes. And, if you're a fan of the Eagles, they do all the hits on this. It's got Hotel California. It's got Take It Easy, Already Gone, all the famous songs, and a lot of like solo stuff. Like, Joe Walsh does Rocky Mountain Way.
I was going to ask if Joe is in the band here.
Yes.
Cool. He's my favorite Eagle. What can I say?
Yeah. And the track list is like, like I said, it's a mix of solo and live stuff. And I think there's like 30 songs on it. So they had to split it over 2 DVDs for the DVD version. But for the Blu-ray, they were able to fit all 30 tracks on one disc. So that's one reason I would recommend the Blu-ray over the DVD, aside from the fact that it's also the lossless audio.
Yeah.
But as far as surround mixes of live albums go, this is one of the most adventurous ones you'll find.
Interesting. Yeah, I've never heard this one, but just the way you've described it, like with the horns in the back, it kind of sounds like Chicago. Like that's how a lot of their multi-channel mixes are.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, as you know, in the original Eagles studio albums, there are not horns in any of their songs. So it does. Yeah. The arrangements are a little bit different on some of the tracks, and that puts an interesting spin on it because, everybody's heard Hotel California like 1,000 times. So, right. Yeah.
And let's talk about one of the greatest live albums ever, and that's Stop Making Sense by the Talking Heads. And I was just watching this last night, so it's very fresh in my mind. But what I think is fascinating about this is that there's actually 2 Atmos mixes. There's the movie soundtrack, which has its own idiosyncrasies and kind of needs to fulfill. And there's the just the audio only experience, which of course you can hear on streaming. And I think maybe the Talking Heads themselves released a Blu-ray of it. And your hosts today, I've heard the 4K mix, and you've heard just the audio mix. So that I'm interested in the 2 perspectives here. And what's fascinating is that they kind of took like a Martin Scorsese approach to this, where if David Byrne's on, if he's being featured on camera, they will raise up his rhythm guitar so you can hear it. They'll bring it up. But if like one of the keyboard players is playing, they'll bring him up. And it's not like it's kind of like a mixture. Like you do feel like you're mostly in the audience and things are very much up front. But at times, like there's a song, and I can't remember if it's which one it is. It might be Life During Wartime, but somebody plays a solo, keyboard solo, and Byrne is running around the stage. And as he's running, the keyboard solo is following him. The placement of it is following him around the room, which is really cool. So if he's backstage, the keyboard sound is behind you. If he's like front right, well then it's going to be in the front right height speaker. But that's really exciting. Now, is the audio only mix like that, or is that something specific to the film?
I don't remember offhand if that thing happens in Life During Wartime, like you said, where it moves around. But I do remember thinking like it is a fairly adventurous mix. It's not like the Eagles one where there's things like, mixed hard pans at the back, but you do get the sense that there's more than just like the venue sound behind you. Like it does feel like the music is wrapping around the room. There was also, I believe, there was a 5.1 DVD that came out some years earlier that has another different surround version of it. But you bring up another thing which is interesting, because on our lists, some of these albums have video and some of them don't. Like obviously for something like Made in Japan, like that wasn't filmed. They only captured the audio. And in the case of most of the vintage albums we're going to talk about, I think all of them, there's no video component. So I think there are other considerations too. Like if you're mixing in surround for a live show, like is it weird when you see a player playing like a solo on the screen in front of you and then it comes out of one of the rear speakers? Right. Like I could see how that might bother some people. So that could be another explanation why some live album mixes tend to be more conservative. I mean, personally, like I don't really care. Like if that example was, for me, like if somebody was playing a sax solo and it came out of my rear speaker, I would think like, oh, that's cool. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There is
Something cinematically interesting that happens in this film, where in the first song is just David Byrne. He comes out and he sings Psycho Killer, and he's got a little tape machine playing. It's probably being piped in from the front of house or whatever. But, he sits down a tape machine and says, I got a tape to play for you. And it's got this little beat that goes, and he sings and plays. So at first, it's very much just upfront and ambience. But as the band starts to fill in behind him, slowly the back speakers begin to fill out as it ends up being like a 9-piece band or something like that, when you have the 2 keyboard players, bass drummer, and the backing singers too, who are really a part of the sonic tapestry as well as the visual aspect. This is a really, really cool album. And when you're talking about the audio only component being adventurous, I'm actually kind of curious to hear that, and I wish that it had been included in this package somehow. But what else can I say about this other than it's an antidepressant in celluloid form. Every time I watch this, it gives me a big lift, and I absolutely love it.
When David Byrne walks out with that like boxy suit, it just always fun.
Makes me laugh every time.
And like you were saying, it's not just a concert, like it's a cinematic film. Like right. There's a stylized component to it. Like it's not like you're just watching a video that was shot. So yeah, I mean, it's iconic. Definitely recommended.
Yeah, Jonathan Demme, who would go on to make The Silence of the Lambs, made this film. So that's diversity.
I'll say. All right, so my next choice is going to be another Elliott Shiner mix, which is Loggins and Messina sitting in again at the Santa Barbara Bowl, which again was recorded, I think, in the early 2000s, like 2004, 2005. One thing that's cool about this is, so Loggins and Messina had a couple albums that were released in quad in the 70s. Their self-titled album, which is the one that has like Angry Eyes and Your Mama Don't Dance, Full Sail and Native Sons. Mm-hmm. But the album that made them famous, Sittin' In, it has like Danny's Song. That album was never released in surround. So this will be a common theme in a lot of our picks, but there's examples of songs where the studio version does not exist in any kind of multi-channel. And for these live versions are the first opportunity to hear those songs in surround. But I mean, my comments on this are relatively similar to the Eagles one. Again, like it's an extremely separated mix. Like the whole back line is in the rear speakers. In the song Angry Eyes, there's an extended sax solo that's totally behind you. A lot of percussion in the rears, backing vocals. And I would say, like, if the only thing you know about Kenny Loggins is like, a lot of the stuff he did in the 80s, like Footloose, Danger Zone. This music is definitely a little bit sort of looser than that. Like it's not that kind of thing. Both their voices are really good on this. Like they were both singing really well. And yeah, I mean, this is long out of print, but I think it's not terribly difficult to find a used copy. I don't think I paid that much for mine a couple years ago, but yeah, really cool release.
If I may make an observation about Elliott Shiner in the, I've only heard a couple of his albums that he just a very little bit of his work, but it seems like he stands out in terms of like the mid 2000s era because, and this will lead in, I guess, to my next choice, but a lot of multi-channel albums from the mid 2000s suffered from the loudness war. And I don't really hear that. I don't really hear that in his mixes.
Yeah, for the most part, I mean, he did a lot of multi-channel mixes. Like there's, dozens of releases, studio and live stuff. I don't know if all of them are totally free of it, but like the standout examples for me, like the Steely Dan stuff, like Gaucho or the Nightfly, the Doobie Brothers, the Captain and Me, like those are all, the mastering of those is great. They sound awesome, good dynamic range. And I would say the same for these live releases, the Eagles and Loggins and Messina ones both sound great. So yeah.
Yeah. A Night at the Opera. That's one of my favorites that he did.
Yes. Yeah.
That one's sick. We were talking about mid 2000s 5.1 mixes and how sometimes they could be quite loud and compressed. And usually that's kind of a dirty word when you talk about compression, but I wanted to highlight this one, David Bowie's Stage, because despite the fact that it has some inherent flaws, it's actually quite an enjoyable mix, I find. And it's sort of like what you were saying, where the Berlin trilogy albums, the Low, Heroes, Lodger, that's my favorite of David Bowie's works. And those albums don't exist in multi-channel, and they should. Like yes. Currently, this is really the only way to hear those songs, like Heroes, like is one of the most famous songs ever written. And that's the only way to hear it. So you and I were both just kind of talking about this beforehand, but I think Tony Visconti was a little bit ahead of the curve here because he says in the liner notes that he's not a fan of the kind of mixes where, again, like it's just the band up front and venue ambience in the back. And it's so exciting to hear Speed of Life, which is the opening track from Low. And you can hear like the synthesizer shooting, and it sounds almost like it's going left, center, right. And maybe it's trailing in the back a little bit, but it's so exciting to hear that. It's exciting to hear the ambient tracks where David's like playing the Chamberlin, which is a kind of mellotron instrument. But the rock songs are really, in your face and aggressive, which I enjoy. It's maybe got some kind of EQ or harshness that I'm not a fan of. But overall, it's very enjoyable. So what did you think about this when you revisited it?
Yeah, it's quite rare. It's on one of those DVD audio discs, as you can see in the picture. And there was also a similar release of the David Live album.
Yes.
Which was not recorded by or mixed by Tony Visconti, I don't think. He didn't do the surround mix on the DVD-A. But I agree. It's cool how in the booklet there's quite a sort of extensive foreword where he talks about, the process of recording the album. It was recorded at Madison Square Garden. And he claims that it's totally live as it happened that night. There's maybe one section where they edited in a performance from a different night, but
Providence, Rhode Island, part of Station to Station, I want to say, from Providence.
But like you said, the best thing about it, aside from the fact that it is a very adventurous mix, partially because there's no video to contend with, like I was saying before, is that there's all these songs where the studio versions don't exist in surround, all the Berlin stuff. For Station to Station, there is a surround mix of the studio version, but I don't think it's very good. Maybe people have different opinions about that. So it's nice to hear those songs, in a more involving surround version. It's interesting, if you look at, there are quite a few Bowie albums that have been mixed in surrounds, but it's it's an interesting selection. You'd think some of the ones that would be go-tos, Let's Dance, there's no surround version of that, but there is one of Heathen, which is this one of his later, post 2000 albums. That one was probably done because it was new at the time when 5.1 was a thing. But supposedly, and I don't know where this comes from, but it's been repeated online, that supposedly Bowie's edict when it came to reissuing these records, or remixing them, was that only the original producers who worked on the record would be the ones allowed to remix them.
Right.
So it's sort of, you end up having this inconsistency across the surround releases where there's, ones like Tony Visconti, as you could tell from this release, is someone who's sort of very interested in surround sound, and his mixes tend to be sort of more involving and experimental. And then there's other ones like Station to Station where there's just reverb in the back.
This is another album where there's been several releases of it over the years. And for instance, the very first one was presented in a very unconventional way, where the tracks weren't presented in concert order. They were actually presented in chronological order. And that was David Bowie's something that he totally gave his blessing. He loved the idea. But the fans didn't, and understandably so, because of course completely destroyed the flow of the concert. So you could buy the original version, which was in a completely different track order. And then I think it came out, I'm sure there were other releases, but there was a CD release around the time, which was brick walled. It had some compression issues and it was kind of harsh, but it restored the running order. And I think it actually added some bonus tracks. And then there was one that came out in about 2015 or so, which plugged in some tracks from another source. So we got the complete show, and it's very harsh sounding to me. And I would argue that this 5.1 mix, for all of its flaws, is the best way to hear the album. And one of the most exciting parts of the concert is the second half when we get the Ziggy Stardust material, because Bowie's in fine vocal form, and the band's kicking. And again, we can compare it because there's an Atmos mix of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars from Ken Scott. So
there's a 5.1 mix too.
And there's a 5.1 mix too, which I haven't heard. But the Ken Scott Atmos mix is pretty good. So yeah, this is a wonderful concert, and some of my favorite versions of these songs. So I'm glad you had the opportunity to revisit it, because even though it is hard to find, I paid like $60 for it, which is a lot of money. But I was glad to have it because this is my favorite Bowie material. And if you can find it, I recommend it. And hopefully, because there is footage from this tour, I don't know if it's the same performance or not, but you can see it in the Moon Age Daydream documentary. And I keep hoping that since we got the 4K of the 4K transfer of Ziggy Stardust movie, I keep hoping maybe we might get a release of this that's video and audio with like a new Atmos mix. So that would be cool.
For sure. Cool. And the last thing I'll add is that it was long rumored that there was going to be a quad release of this album in the 70s, because it came out, I think, 75, right?
No. This is like after quad. This would have been 1979.
It was like the late 70s, but
Yeah.
it was rumored that there would be a quad version. And none of Bowie's albums that were released during the period where quad was a thing were released in that format for whatever reason. Like, I'm surprised, a record like Young Americans, which was on, RCA, one of the biggest quad sporting labels, there was never a, quad LP or tape version of that album. But Tony Visconti mentions in the liner notes that he did put up like extra mics with the intention to do a quad mix. Like, he was just sort of covering all his bases.
Interesting.
And he was finally able to use those ambient mics in mixing the albums for surround decades later. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's cool. Yeah. Cool, man.